Republicans are looking for the path back to power in Washington, but right now they're engaged in an internal battle over loyalty to former President Donald Trump, with Congresswoman Liz Cheney, a member of Republican leadership, under fire for her outspoken criticism of Trump's conduct in relation to the January 6th insurrection. Joining us this morning to help sort things out is a man who served New Hampshire on Capitol Hill from the Republican Revolution of the early 90s to the dawn of the Tea Party era, Congressman Charlie Bass. Congressman, thanks for joining us this morning on
Great to be with you, Adam.
So, Congressman, is the Republican Party truly going through an identity crisis right now, or is this just another episode in that long-running series of Donald Trump making things more complicated for elected Republicans than they have to be?
Well, it's both, obviously. I have to say at the very start, I would have been one of the first people to push the green button to the article of impeachment after the insurrection of the Capitol, and my support for Representative Liz Cheney from Wyoming is certainly there, 100%. But the party has been through these kinds of loud debates in the past. The Democrats are having their own issues, which is significant. The Republicans are in a good position, in my view, to take over the Congress and the Senate next year. And I don't see Trump as a candidate for president or being in a position to have the kind of influence over the process that he has now.
Why is that, Congressman? Why do you think that somehow President Trump's influence will diminish? It seems pretty strong at the moment.
Well, if I can be somewhat critical, Donald Trump is basically a wounded old politician who's growing crazier by the day. And at some point, the other candidates, like Senator Scott from South Carolina, or Governor DeSantis from Florida, and others all over the country, are going to become more interested in moving into positions of leadership. And I just don't see how this goes on forever. However, as we start focusing on the election next year, understanding that the Republicans really only need to pick up 4 seats in order to take control of the Congress, that the census results has benefited Republicans. People are going to want to, who are in positions of power in Washington, are going to want to focus more on that and not on the Trump personality. But I will agree with you, Adam. Right now, the litmus test for the Republican Party and being a faithful Republican is Donald Trump. That's the way it is. It's not going to remain that way, though, in my view.
And what does it say to you, though, that Liz Cheney, who is this rising star, essentially, was viewed as a strong U.S. Senate candidate in the last cycle, but took a pass on that her criticism has taken her to this brink of not just of losing her position in leadership, but potentially getting a primary and being ousted from Washington altogether?
I think your comments are absolutely correct. I would, as far as the Congress goes, I would suspect that 9 out of 10 Americans don't know who the third ranking member of the Republican conference is, or even what the Republican conference is. But what's bigger here is that she is indeed a rising star. She's a well-known name, obviously, nationally in the Republican Party. And she's a person of significant integrity. I agree with you that it would be very difficult now for her to win an election next year. And as a result, I think she's moving into a different world, i.e. that of a national voice for conservative Republican politics. And that's where this whole thing is headed. My view about the internal dispute that's going on in the Republican Party is that it's disappointing that it's reached the point where they're going to have to vote her out of office. If I had been she, I would have resigned, because the position itself is actually the communication arm of the Republican Party. And to have somebody that isn't in sync with the majority of the party, of the conference, whether you like it or not, is unfortunate. And she is a legitimate spokesperson for a view which I share. And I think it's going to be the view in the end that prevails and keeps the party alive and strong in the next election and also in the presidential election 4 years from now.
There are some who trace this division and hyper-partisanship back to 1994 and the Republican Revolution. You came into Washington on that wave to serve alongside Speaker Newt Gingrich and the rest down there. How do you think that compares to what's going on now?
Yes, that's an excellent question. Newt Gingrich was certainly a revolutionary figure within the Republican Party. The Republican Party had become used to being a comfortable minority. I'll never forget my father, who served in Congress in the same district I did, coming to me and saying, "Charlie, why can't you guys get along? We used to, my roommate during the summer was a Democrat who was the chairman of the banking committee, so on." And I said to my father, "You may have had a good time, but during the 10 years that you were in Congress, how many bills passed?" And of course, none. Actually, one, naming the Cathedral of the Pines a historic monument. That was it. Newt Gingrich came to Congress. He redefined what it means to be in the minority. It was a pretty difficult period when he first took over, and there were a lot of glass broken, and it's the same today. The problem is that it's so partisan now that the only way that you can pass any legislation is in a budget environment, which isn't really designed to carry tax cuts and issues that don't, and spending issues that can't pass through the normal process. This is particularly true in the Senate, where there really needs to be a lot more bipartisanship. It's a mistake. On the other hand, I also believe that it would be a dreadful mistake if the filibuster were abolished, because then basically you have tyranny of the majority, and the only, when all three parties are in charge, and it'd be almost like a parliamentary style government, which I don't think is good for the United States.
Your career arc moved through the getting things done era, and now it's so ideological it's tough to get anything done. Any perspective or idea on how they in Washington pull back and get back to a point where people can agree on things and where Congress can function?
Well, sometimes little things count. There's been a tradition in the Senate that you can't introduce legislation unless you have a Republican and a Democrat on the bill. They ought to push that hard. The issue of combining, for example, the cloakrooms so that Democrats and Republicans, when they're not on the floor of the House or Senate, are in the same room, sort of talking with one another. Communication is important, and every member of Congress and every senator should feel an obligation to work every day in the best interest of the nation, i.e., think about country and state before party. And parties are important. They represent the basic philosophies of each side, but there ought to be more communication, and that starts with the attitude that every congressman and senator should bring to the office every day, and that is to do the work of the nation.
With the extremism problem in both parties, it would seem there's a tremendous market opportunity right now, if you will, for some kind of centrist figure to sort of swoop in and grab that great middle of the country. Who's going to do that?
Yeah, I don't see that. Obviously, I think that's a great idea, but the reality is that the country's increasingly polarized, pushed by new communications, the internet and so forth, which really, and television, radio, no offense, that push extremist views, and people believe much too much of what they see and hear. There's not enough fact checking and so forth. And I don't know. I don't have an answer to that issue until Americans start to really become concerned that the concept of having political instability in the United States, which was demonstrated on January 6th, 2021, scares enough people so they say, come on, you people who we've elected, start working for our interests and not the interests of yourself or your party.
You mentioned Tim Scott, you mentioned Ron DeSantis. Who impresses you right now in the Republican Party in terms of who we should be looking at in the next cycle?
Well, I like Tim Scott. I like a lot of Republicans. I happen to personally believe that governors tend to make better presidents than senators do. Senators deal with philosophy. Governors deal with administration. It's the administrative branch or executive branch of government that they're running for. And we have some very able candidates on the Republican side, but it's really too early right now. I think it's important to let these candidates talk about what they're going to do in 2024. And, it's going to be very interesting because right now you have to lace yourself up with Donald Trump in order to have credibility in the Republican Party. But my advice to these individuals that are looking forward, be careful, because you're going to have to live with what you say now later on, and it could be an entirely different world. Besides, his political issues, the former president has enormous issues associated with his business in the state of New York, and he is going to. Things may occur there that would make people who are unwilling to separate themselves or put any space between themselves and the former president in a pretty difficult position in an election 4 years from now.
All right, Congressman Charlie Bass, we appreciate your perspective here on Close Up, and I hope to have you back again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, Adam.